Welcome to the latest in our Ericsson UnBoxed social series broadcasts, where each week I will be taking a detailed look at different aspects of communications technology in the company of some of the industry's leading experts. Now, in our last broadcast, we looked at the overall benefits of connectivity, and today we are going to take a step further and explore the effects of digitization as an enabler, specifically around the biggest issues of our time, sustainability and climate action. Now, joining me are two esteemed experts. First, let me welcome Stella Medlicott, who is the Senior Vice President, CMO, and Head of Group Function Marketing and Corporate Relations at Ericsson. Stella, welcome. It is a delight to see you here again.
Thanks very much, Alex. Great to see you too.
And Ross O'Brien is the Senior Contributing Editor to Insights for the MIT Technology Review. Ross, welcome from Hong Kong.
Thank you very much.
It's wonderful to see you both. Now, quickly, just so that you know, this is for the audience, we will be doing a Q&A at the end. For the first part of this broadcast, I'm going to get to ask Stella and Ross the questions that I get to ask. But we will be taking questions throughout from Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and we will be taking a lot of your questions at the end of the broadcast. We have viewers from London, from New Orleans, from Paris, and Bihar. I am so excited about today's broadcast because we have a lot of viewers and they are coming from all over the world. Now, today, because we are looking at sustainability and we're looking at the Insights report, I have a question first for you, Stella. Perhaps it's not so simple, but all the more crucial for that. Why is a technology company like Ericsson talking about making the world a better place?
And it is a good question, so thanks for that. And I have to say, we have spent a lot of time really looking at our purpose and addressing the reason why we exist. And in many ways, it's probably one of the most important questions that we can ask ourselves as a business, and that is, why does the world need Ericsson? And what we found was that as we enter this hyper phase of innovation, we see that our technology really enables the digitalization of society. And by holding firm to our purpose, we can help to contribute to some of the planet's greatest challenges.
So let's take a closer look at what this means for Ericsson. So Stella, the future that we want to create, how big is that challenge for Ericsson and of course for everybody else?
Well, today, obviously, we're here to talk about the climate crisis. And I think the important thing just to kick us off is to say that climate crisis isn't a crisis. It is the crisis that faces the world today. And we've seen with the latest IPCC report that we're already witnessing a profound impact of climate change. And going forward, this is going to impact everything from food production to migration patterns to the global economy. And the facts are clear. In order to avoid irreversible climate tipping points, society needs to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And this means cutting greenhouse gases by half by 2030 and over the next decades to net zero emissions by 2050. And what we've seen is even with the pandemic, which has really enabled us to achieve the largest reduction in greenhouse gases since World War II, we're still forecast to meet the annual target for reducing emissions. So we need larger transformational changes to address the climate crisis to ensure the world can meet its targets. And that's really why we're here today in partnership with MIT Technology Review to show the possibilities that connectivity, digitalization and 5G can offer in order to unleash new waves of innovation and collaboration that can help industry address some of the greatest challenges in respect to climate action.
This is a huge undertaking, and we know this because it is going to require a global initiative. Soon we're going to be seeing all of the headlines from COP26, but I want to take it back to today. And Ross, at MIT Tech Review, you headed up the research that we're going to be talking about today. What was its aim, and what were some of the findings?
Well, what we were trying to do was establish how enterprises today factor in carbon emission targets into their corporate strategy, and how decarbonization and sustainability are linked at the corporate agenda level, and how those things drive digital transformation more broadly. We looked very specifically at three carbon intensive, and I would say network intensive industries: transportation, manufacturing, and energy production, primarily but not exclusively renewable energy. We had a couple of dozen interviews with senior executives in renewable energy firms, smart manufacturing, logistics firms, all across the spectrum. A number of firms that looked at smart management technologies for managing energy and workflow. So we looked at the entire, if you like, information chain of what the expenditure of carbon looked like in these organizations. And what we found was that connectivity, and specifically cellular connectivity, is actually a unique and fundamental driver of decarbonization today. It's already used in a number of contexts, and whether it's 4G or 5G, the use of digital broadband technologies is actually helping loads of companies across supply chains remotely monitor their power consumption, troubleshoot and repair infrastructure remotely, or enable IoT applications, all of which enables efficiency today, and most of which then in turn lowers power and material consumption. So there's already a material benefit to carbon reduction, even if it isn't, right up there in shiny lights. The speed of deployment, lower latency, all the things that wireless networks enable firms to be fast and flexible in achieving business efficient gains, all those directly translate to better performance in reducing the carbon intensity of their activities. So this means that in the future, that once we start moving from, say, passive low carbon benefits, that is to say, we're running our business better, therefore we're expending less, to more active carbon reduction efforts, where the data that circulates over these smart networks is actually used to pinpoint carbon intensive activities and take active steps to lower them. That, again, wireless technology is the way to go. As Stella mentioned, we've got to do this fast. And there's no faster way to do this than investing in wireless technologies.
Stella, that's really good news for Ericsson, isn't it? What were your key takeaways?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways was the urgency of the situation, and Ross really just mentioned that as well, and that by building on the insights, we can use digitalisation underpinned by the mobile network and the solutions that we can use now to accelerate decarbonisation. But in order to do that, we need to have increasing access to 5G to allow those scalable technologies and digital practices, and also enable lower carbon generating solutions to flourish as well. The second thing that really stood out is that sustainability is also, it makes sound business sense. And I know that sounds really obvious, but leveraging digitalisation to lower carbon emissions is also about improving business efficiency. It's about increasing visibility and productivity and managing demand spikes, as well as reducing operating costs. So it makes perfect sense from that perspective. And the third thing that really stood out for me is that more awareness is really needed within the industry in order to kickstart some collaborative efforts. By nurturing this 5G developer ecosystem, we can really start to innovate and think about the benefits that connectivity can bring.
I have a question from both of you that's coming in from one of our viewers. Deepak asks, how exactly does 5G help to reduce global emission and help make a sustainable environment? Ross, I'd like to come to you first because you mentioned 5G first. And Stella, you mentioned it second, so I'll come to you after.
Sure. Again, it is. It's the combination of being able to build broadband dense networks at scale and speed. So again, the lower latency of 5G networks allows for a lot of industrial IoT applications. It allows better pathways for time-sensitive data. Increasingly and surprisingly, a lot of firms are beginning to use energy management systems through cellular connected facilities. And 5G just allows, say, a logistics firm or a company that runs hundreds of remote retail operations. It allows them to gather and collect that data from disparate locations a lot faster and in real time. And this is actually, 5G is particularly useful for the renewable energy industry. So connectivity, again, being able to synchronize power generation flows from the production facilities and put them back on the grid, this becomes a much more complex effort when we deal with remote and variable power sources from renewable sources such as wind farms or solar farms. These facilities are smaller than the average electricity generation plant. They're often in remote, hard to get to areas. They need to, and because their power source is variable, synchronization and being able to allow a power company to plan for how and when that energy comes onto the grid is incredibly important. And so high-speed broadband defined by 5G is a game changer in enabling the connectivity of renewable energy sources to traditional power grids.
I'm looking forward to digging into some of those renewable energy, that sector, in just a few moments. But Stella, briefly, what is it that 5G offers in addition to what Ross is saying?
And I guess really, as Ross was really just talking about, mobile broadband infrastructure will specifically facilitate the decarbonisation efforts. And that's in energy, manufacturing and transportation. But one of the things that we've also discussed and observed through the study is actually by reducing emissions globally will come when 5G infrastructure can really facilitate this interconnected systems that will allow vast amounts of data to be shared across supply chains, logistic networks and energy grids as well. And while existing communication networks allow this to some extent already, the increased speed and reliability of 5G will enable networks and organisations to take their value chains to the next level as well.
So now I want to come back to the report and where it sits actually in the current context, because COP26 is starting in Glasgow in just a few days. Let's dig in to how each industry has a part to play, each sector has a part to play. But I want to start with the priority sectors. Stella, I'm imagining that energy is our starting point here.
Yeah, absolutely. And according to the UN, 85% of power in 2050 has to come from renewable sources. And that is a huge transformation for energy operators and for distributors, because they need better and more comprehensive control of their distribution networks and the ability to respond in real time to rapid production changes as well. And with 5G, these operators can connect smart meters to the grid and start to connect everything in their value chain. And that will enable them to proactively detect faults, see demand spikes that might arise, and also leverage external data as well.
So, Ross, already we've heard a bunch about data and how important it is. I'm sure we're going to hear about that over the next few minutes as well. But what Stella's saying is did your MIT interviews, did they bear out? Did these comments bear out in your interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's sort of there's a real here and now story around the ability to simply use wireless connectivity to, say, troubleshoot remotely installed wind turbines. I spoke to one NGO that built wind farms in rural communities in northern Peru. And while they weren't using 5G, they were using cellular connectivity to ensure that the turbines were working optimally, and when they weren't, providing data to on-site staff to make sure that they got up and running, thereby ensuring that wind production was maintained at a high level and reducing transport miles of having to send technicians out for hundreds of miles. So there's sort of that's the practical baseline we're at today. On the other end of the spectrum, we have companies like Statkraft in one of the largest renewable power providers in the Nordics, who is actively trying to connect their energy management systems with those of their large industrial clients and sharing data about performance, load management, and energy planning to make sure that their large power-hungry corporates are making the best use of renewable energy sources when they are available.
Now, Stella, Ross mentioned a couple of options, a couple of opportunities there, and I know that Ericsson already has some partnerships. Can you tell me how that plays out? How you're working with organizations to really try and move this initiative forward?
Yeah, and I guess a really good example of that is in the transport sector with Einride. So Ericsson, Ericsson, Telia and Einride are creating significantly more sustainable transport ecosystem by connecting electric autonomous vehicles and therefore reducing or even eliminating harmful emissions. And 5G is a key enabler of sustainable transport because it provides the connectivity and the reliability that is needed to safely introduce autonomous trucks onto public roads. And Ericsson's cloud core for 5G is powering the first commercial installation of Einride's autonomous electric transport system.
It's quite exciting, and as a person who drives electric, I'm excited to hear about that as well. We did speak in an earlier broadcast last year, if you can believe it. We spoke a lot about smart vehicles and connected cars, not necessarily the automatic sort of autonomous vehicles, but it does seem to me like this is a sector that is important for moving forward. Ross, did you speak with Einride when you were doing your interviews?
Yeah, I did, and I think the key point here, as Stella mentioned, is the combination of autonomous and electric. I mean, both require connectivity, both being transportation elements. Need wireless connectivity, but there's a complement to the two that ensures that decarbonization efforts are accelerated. And what I mean by that is that, as Stella mentioned, the autonomous vehicles obviously run much more efficiently. But what Einride told me is that there's a tendency to look at that and immediately try to run autonomous vehicles for greater distances because they are running more efficiently. When you are running those on traditional fossil fuels, that immediately detracts from the carbon benefit. So by electrifying autonomous vehicles, you reduce that, if you like, carbon crisis. But what you also do is allow for greater optimization on the autonomous the autonomous logistic fleet. You can program information about where charging stations are. You can optimize route planning so that electric vehicles are efficiently going from charging station to charging station at speed with as little interference as possible. You create a whole systemic logistics loop that is both cost and time efficient, but also importantly carbon efficient.
And that infrastructure is so important and so essential for people to invest in these spaces. Now, we will be looking at manufacturing in more detail in our next broadcast on the 4th of November. But that is one of the biggest users of energy. Ross, what did you learn from the manufacturing sector?
Well, there again, I was surprised to find out just how much is already going on, but it shouldn't have surprised me because obviously operational efficiency through digital transformation has been a trend for nearly 2 decades now, and the pace of efficiency creation is not abating. But now, again, what you're adding is the ability to not only manage energy consumption, optimize the working processes of increasingly automated elements. And in some cases, I mean, I spoke to the digital transformation leads at Ericsson's smart factory in Plano, Texas. Even manage the consumption of the water that is being used to keep the gardens around the factory optimally healthy. In the future, smart factories are not only going to be more energy efficient, they're also going to optimize production environments so that materials are wasted less, they're kept at optimal conditions so that they are produced on demand and in peak condition, and wastage and carbon and carbon footprints of everything that comes off the factory floor is going to be precisely known. And I think that that's the big next step, that manufacturers are going to begin to, once they've managed to have total visibility over the carbon impact of the production process, then in a sense, print that information onto every SKU that comes off the assembly line so that the next person in the supply chain sees the full carbon impact of what they're taking on board.
Ross, this was an enormous undertaking. The report, is a huge opportunity for people to really see across the sector. But having written and worked within the technology space for a long time, I'm sure you have seen a lot of what came out of the report. Was there anything that surprised you during your conversations in the different sectors?
I suppose the most surprising thing is how quickly industry participants are taking up the notion of what the next thing will be. I mean, obviously, we are, as Stella pointed out, the IPCC report has put that in sharp relief. We've got a long way to go and some hard yards ahead of us to hit sustainability goals. But at the same time, a lot of firms are thinking extremely 2 and 3 steps beyond what they need to do to make sustainability happen. The guys that I talked to in Peru who were looking at cellular connectivity largely as an enabler to reduce their travel costs when they troubleshot wind turbine failure. They're thinking about using the data they generate about wind power generation and turning that into a carbon credit that can be sold to investors down the line. The amount of innovation and the, if you like, sort of carbon forward thinking that goes on in these new products and services that kind of come out of the data generated is absolutely amazing.
That's so exciting. I love the idea of the creativity and innovation and creating solutions that are very human-centered as well when it comes down to it. Stella, was there anything that surprised you out of the report?
I just love that phrase, carbon forward thinking as well. I think I'm going to try and use that again.
Totally. We've all got that in our pockets now. Thanks.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, a little bit reiterating, time really is against us, I think. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I keep seeing that I think starts to build hard at the pressure. But the pandemic showed that we can change practices, and emission levels can also change rapidly. But we really do need to leverage technology and think about how we can accelerate that decarbonisation of enterprises. And there are some ways that are quite simple, and then there are more areas where we just haven't even imagined what it could be yet, but there's a lot of opportunity for us to do so. So we do need to act now. We need to deploy 5G to continue that digitalisation. We need to increase innovation by allowing that scalable technology to focus on how to create lower carbon generating solutions. And also, I think the other thing that really struck out to me is we do really need to focus on building the awareness both with government and industry. And we need to bring together government, industry and technology to really start to think about the full benefits that technology and connectivity can bring. And it's not just about data and sensors, but the true value of 5G, big data, IoT, and that connected ecosystem across the whole value chain. And this is where I think we can really allow for exponential change to actually occur.
Very exciting. It's a roadmap. It's an exciting one. And now the roadmap of this broadcast is that we are turning to our audience. I can see that I've already got a whole bunch of questions. People are hungry to ask, so I'm going to be their medium and allow them to speak. For the audience, please know that we are taking questions from Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We will incorporate as many as we possibly can. Stella, we've looked at a lot of different industries, different geographies. What to you is a common thread?
I think one of the common I think the one good thing that's starting to come through is that all of the different industries are starting to address this. And I think it's really reassuring what Ross was saying earlier about everyone is thinking about what they can do here. I think the other piece that we're starting to see is it is across the value chain as well. And what I'm really excited to see is how it's also being adopted by investor communities as well. So being able to report on ESG standards, being able to sort of have science-based targets that we can measure is becoming increasingly important for businesses as we move forward. So I think these are things that we're starting to see. And obviously, as I mentioned before, a lot of the pieces that are about having effective business is also linked to having sustainable business as well. And so we're starting to see that across a whole range of different industries.
So, Ross, there's one here from Deepak. Which part of the power and utility sector will benefit from the deployment of 5G? For instance, power generation, or is it power distribution?
Well, I'm going to cop out and say both, because it very much is the case. I mean, on the generation side, as I mentioned, renewables are, forgive me, a flaky source of power today. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. Power generation is variable in a way that energy planners do not like. Therefore, better and more dynamic real-time distribution technologies are needed so that trade-offs can be made from alternate renewable sources, and the ability to, again, synchronize data between renewable facilities and traditional grids is absolutely important. We spoke to many renewable power technology developers, particularly in Europe, that are struggling with that issue around sort of making sure that distribution networks are optimized. On the generation side, it's equally important because, as I said, a lot of these facilities are remote, they're disparate, they're small, and they're, because it's a somewhat of a startup space, they're opportunistic. Therefore, fast deployments of broadband-rich 5G networks are kind of the thing that these facilities need, because to get up and running, to get connected to the grid, and again, back to the earlier statement, to make sure that they're running optimally. The world of renewable power is going to be tremendously diverse. It's going to involve a lot of onshore and offshore generation capabilities. And again, the centralization is not in the renewable game plan. So when you have all that, and let's not forget the fact that quite a lot of renewables power in the future, we hope, will come from the fact that everybody sticking solar panels on their rooftops are going to sell power back to the grid, also increasing the need for robust and far-reaching data connectivity. 5G is the key enabler for ensuring the health of that entire dynamic and disparate renewable energy grid.
Well, that is our plan here in my house. Stella, what is the role of Ericsson in that? And this is a follow-up from Deepak.
And what I would say here is, again, it's about, when we look at this, what we're really looking to address is how can we get that connectivity across all of the different parts of the value chain. And as we mentioned before, some of these areas can be quite simple. It can be about sort of connecting meters to the grid. It can be about sort of looking at how we can start to take on board some of the external factors and how that can start to impact the pieces that will drive the decisions within the energy space. But as Ross said, it's about not just the production, but also the distribution of energy. And by leveraging 5G, and what we see is by really bringing together the industry, together with technology, together with the application layers that need to sit on top of that, we can start to look at really new use cases on how we can address some of these challenges as well.
Well, Wayne has a great question, I think, when it comes to how you roll this out or how this message gets out. He says, how do we get this message out to uneducated carriers? And he says, I guess that's a question for you, Stella. When you talk to customers and operators and enterprises, are they aware of the benefits of 5G that they can bring to the planet at large, not just their businesses? Is there a difference between early adopters and others?
And I think there always is in every industry. You have early adopters. But I think, as Ross had mentioned earlier, I think the good thing here is that we are starting to see that everyone is recognising the importance of 5G. And what we're starting to see across our industry is that we're also looking at all of the value chains, and many of the carriers and operators are also addressing this. So what we find is the customers that we talk to, they do see this. Also, as we're starting to look at the opportunities into enterprises and into industries as well, sustainability is becoming even more important as a topic. And just even over the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen a real increase in sustainability being really top of the agenda as well. It used to be something that was lower down, a sort of, and sustainability is sort of a nice to have, if you like, whereas now it's very much an imperative. So I think the more that we can start to address this, the more that we can bring it up to the top of the agenda, the better. But I think, as I talked about before, it's about bringing the carriers, it's about bringing the different industries and also governments together so that we can really work and collaborate as one and start to innovate about how technology can help us with climate change.
Ross, we've spoken a lot about the generation sector, the distribution sector. I'm wondering what other sectors, what other industries you spoke with for the report.
Well, again, manufacturing and transportation were the two other ones, and again, the premise was that between the three of those three sectors account for roughly half of the carbon emissions that come from industry, and those three industries also were, if you like, best placed to achieve real carbon reduction gains with the use of new technologies. So, I mean, again, as Stella mentioned earlier, in order for all of these targets to work, over 80% of our power sources have to be renewable by the time 2030 rolls around. Similarly, manufacturing, transportation, we need to electrify transportation processes as fast as possible. And herein is the bigger point. All these three elements, transportation, power generation, production, and a form, if you like, a macro ecosystem that thrives on each other. As I said earlier, the biggest potential gains we will see will be when data is shared. So transportation companies send their carbon contribution data to a warehouse and on to a retailer, and all that information is informed by a power company that's supplied them all with clean energy. At the end of the day, without sounding overly groovy about it, we are all in this together. These three industries are kind of the core elements of what could be a, if you like, the evolution of a carbon neutral value chain through the sharing of insight and the literal connectivity of the elements that bring goods and services to all of us.
I will embrace the groove. I think it's an important. Thing to remember, really, and it is exciting to hear that so many industries are not only embracing, but they're jumping in with both feet. I'm imagining, that there are incentives, not just from a commercial point of view, but perhaps also, and Stella, you mentioned this before, from governments as well. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that for me, Stella? This idea of the need for joined up thinking, to coin a phrase, the need for industry, government, and perhaps other elements to come together in order to accelerate this positive future.
No, absolutely. And I think this is why things like COP26, which you mentioned earlier, are so important for us as we're moving forward. And obviously from the connectivity perspective, some of the pieces that we need to be able to achieve is to start to think about how do we remove the barriers and how do we make sure that we can allocate spectrum so that we can have the rollout of 5G. Because it's when you have that rollout of 5G that you can really then start to see the innovation that's going to happen on top of the network as well. And these are where we'll start to see some of the use cases that can really drive some of the changes that could start to really have some significant impacts on climate change as well. We need to be able to sort of prioritise digitalisation, and that infrastructure is one of the key pieces. And the pandemic has also really proven why that is so important for us. We need to have digitalisation across countries, because we've seen also in the US, we've seen across Europe, but actually there isn't that shared digitalisation across all of the countries as well. And then we also need to start thinking about supporting public and private collaboration. And so this is, again, where businesses are coming together, where we're innovating against a common goal as well. And so these, I think, are some of the areas that we really should be looking to address.
Now, one of the things that we have been hearing a lot as industry has been moving more towards these sustainability goals is, particularly in the UK, but also globally, this idea of greenwashing. And we have a question here from Beth. Beth says, like you said, we've seen sustainability more and more as a topic. Stella, is this a case of marketing or is it a case of greenwashing?
Well, and again, a really, really good question. And I think this is one of the challenges that we have to address. And again, what we're starting to see, which is really, really good, is that we're starting to get a lot more robust reporting as well. And I think it's very easy for a lot of organisations to jump on the bandwagon to make some claims, especially if you're making claims that are so far out into the future as well. And so there's a few things that are really, really important. It's to have science-based targets. It's also to make sure that as you're putting metrics in place around sustainability targets, that you have very clear steps on how you're actually going to achieve that, and that you can report on those steps as well. And the good thing is what we're starting to see, certainly through the way that businesses are governed, is that those metrics are becoming even more important and even more rigorous as we move forward, which I think is a great step forward for us.
Ross, I'm curious about how that idea of greenwashing featured in your research, if it in fact did at all.
Well, I mean, to be honest, it didn't, because the working assumption is that the sanitizing light of pure data and transparency was going to remove the taint of greenwashing, and I'm going to trip over a metaphor that involves washing away greenwashing, but bear with me. We have a world where increasingly with IoT-enabled everything, every articulated robot on a factory floor, every SKU that gets loaded onto a truck is going to have some intelligence about it. And as I said at the outset, while we're not here yet, we will be at a point where the data about every piece of value that moves along our value chain is fully coded with a sense of its carbon impact. So as we go forward, we are going to have firms being able to report on truly granular and comprehensive data about their carbon performance. There will be, in a sense, no ability to greenwash in a future where every granule has been fully vetted by a compliant and shared system that understands the carbon footprint measured at every step of the way.
Interesting, once again, this idea of transparency through data, and this is something that has been a thread throughout this entire conversation. Now, I have a question here that I think is that is from Andrew, and it's important because ultimately it winds up a lot of what it is that we've been talking about today. Andrew says access to 5G is crucial. I think we've made that point very clearly. So, how do you intend to make it available, affordable, and efficient around the world in places, for example, he says, like Africa? Stella, I'd like to jump to you for this one.
Absolutely. And I think, again, this is really just linking to a lot of the things that we've already talked about here, which is around it's about enabling that rollout of technology, and that needs working together with operators, also with governments, to make sure that we can allocate spectrum, that we can get licenses, that we can actually start to distribute the 5G networks without sort of making it, if you like, a tax on society. And I think that's going to be one of the key things that we do need to do here. And so the rollout of technology is going to be crucially important. And in some parts of the world, that is even also just rolling out from 3G, 4G technology as well. And so it's really sort of coming together to accelerate how we can start to drive that. And by doing so, also see the benefits that will come on top of the network as well. So this is obviously, as you start to see the benefits that we can see from education perspective, as well as also sustainability, as well as also from growing GDP as well. So it's linked into so many different ways.
Ross, did you see any innovative uses of or ways of ensuring that 5G is distributed from the people that you spoke with?
Well, I've spent the last couple of years talking to operators of 5G networks around the world, or those that plan to launch them. And one of the things that keeps coming up is that the notion that in order to monetize and be a successful 5G operator, you need to cultivate an ecosystem of services that, in effect, the operator itself does not entirely own or develop. And if I think about it, I think about sustainability as being kind of one of those application sets or part of that ecosystem. We're already, in the conversations that I've had for this report, I've already seen energy management system providers help firms who manage remote retail chains file their ESG reports by scooping up energy performance statistics from hundreds of remote locations. That's a service, and that's going to be something that, as consumers expect and demand ESG compliance from the companies that provide them with goods and service, is going to become more and more important. And operators around the world are looking for innovative, desirable and valuable application sets to add to the way they provide enterprises with value. And I think visibility, granularity, compliance reporting, all of this stuff makes for a very compelling solution set.
I'm excited to hear that an ecosystem towards sustainability is going to be the ecosystem that helps the ecosystem. So thank you to Ross and to Stella. If you have enjoyed this broadcast, please do keep commenting and sharing. The report has been shared in links on Facebook, on Twitter, and LinkedIn. It has been extremely exciting to learn how digitalization is playing such a crucial and critical part across the board in delivering sustainability and tackling climate change, surely the most pressing issue of our time. Now, remember to log on for the next in Ericsson Social Series broadcasts, when we will be looking in more detail at one of the sectors that we touched on today, specifically the revolution in automotive manufacturing. Goodbye for now.